Hey guys, today I'll show you a horror thriller TV series named Motherland Fort Salem Season 2. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. At the end of last season, Scylla, released by her instructor, returned to the Spree's stronghold, only to unexpectedly encounter Rael's mother, Willa, there. Meanwhile, General Sarah led a mission to rescue Adel's tribe, but fell into a trap set by the traitors called Camarilla. To save the general, Tally volunteered to become the new maid. Due to an accident, Rael and Abigail were left behind. With time running out, General Sarah had no choice but to order a retreat. Around Rael and Abigail, a massive energy field suddenly appeared, protecting them. However, everyone on the helicopter assumed that Rael and Abigail were surely dead. Adil was in tears like a giant baby, and Tally did her best to comfort him using her muscles. Soon after, the group arrived at Fort Salem, where Abigail's mother, Petra, had been waiting at the airport for a long time. She blamed the general for her daughter's death. Knowing that the Abigail family had lost their last descendant, the general chose not to say much. The instructor and Tally embraced, comforting each other. Not long after, the general called an urgent meeting to discuss the Camarilla. Based on intelligence and observations, the general believed that the Camarilla had found a way to block witches' spells, and were also collecting witches' vocal cords to mimic their voices through special devices. It appeared that Abigail's cousin had actually died at the hands of the Camarilla. Of course, the most terrifying was the plague weapon that could kill witches instantly. While they were discussing, a subordinate came to report an emergency. Earlier that day, the vice president's daughter, Penelope, accidentally melted the stained glass on a window while singing, clearly indicating her witch lineage, which neither she nor the vice president was aware of. The higher-ups immediately realized the danger, as the Camarilla were hunting witches everywhere. They needed to find witches who were unaware of their heritage first. After the meeting, the general spoke with Tally, explaining that normally, the selection of a maid would involve screening and years of training. Although Tally's actions were brave, the general could not bear to see her waste her life and offered to help Tally regain her youth. Just then, subordinates brought news that Rael and Abigail had survived. It turns out that Rael and Abigail were safe after the energy field explosion and were trying to find other companions. However, Abigail soon discovered a body wrapped in mushrooms on the ground, likely a victim of the explosion. Abigail thought they should bring the body back to Fort Salem for research, but Rael disagreed, fearing they would become experimental subjects. While they were arguing, a squad of witch cavalry found them and confirmed their identities. A plane was immediately dispatched from Fort Salem to bring them home. Tally decided to accept the general's offer and gave up her maid status. Afterward, General Sarah took the time to meet with the vice president. She straightforwardly spoke about the matrilineal bloodline of witches. It turns out males in witch families also possess magical abilities, but it is difficult for men to pass these abilities on. Therefore, the government can only trace witch descendants through the maternal line. This includes deserters or those who married civilians whose descendants might forget their witch identity. Now, the general hoped to test the vice president's daughter. Once her witch identity was confirmed, Penelope would have to enlist by law. Although the vice president was somewhat reluctant, he had to accept due to the law. Soon, Penelope was brought to Fort Salem for testing. Through a special mirror, it was clear that her vocal cords were unusual. Additionally, her singing caused 2 columns of water to rise from the magical pool, confirming Penelope's witch lineage. Thus, she bid farewell to her father and entered Fort Salem to begin her studies. At this point, Rael and Abigail had arrived at Fort Salem, where Abigail's mother personally came to welcome them. Meanwhile, the doctor performed a ceremony for Tally. Through a series of procedures, they successfully severed Tally's connection with General Sarah, allowing her to quit the maid status and to regain her youth. After a brief brush with death, the witch trio finally reunited and shared their experiences. General Sarah quickly inquired about the energy field incident. After some deliberation, Rael and Abigail admitted to causing the explosion. The general realized this meant the military now had a new type of weapon and ordered the doctor to train the duo to master this powerful force. After leaving the general's office, Abigail and Adil met again. Absence makes the heart grow fonder, and that evening the two found a grassy spot to plow their grassy lands. Given Adil's mastery over the power of the earth, the surrounding area shook dramatically. Considering the squad's excellent performance, the general specifically approved their entry into the War College. However, joy often brings sorrow. That night, the general was kept awake by past events, and Tally suffered nightmares as a result. In her dreams, she followed the general into a jungle, but it seemed no one else could see her. Soon, a group of people chanting spells appeared, summoning insects from the ground, trapping the general and her group. At a critical moment, a mysterious soldier used her special ability, causing the enemies to start killing each other. The terrifying scene jolted Tally awake. Seeing this, Rael and Abigail quickly came to comfort her, telling her it was just a dream. However, the scars that remained on Tally were all too visible. Elsewhere, Willa spoke to Scylla about past events. A week ago, as one of the leaders of the spree, she had attended a leaders' meeting. Unbeknownst to them, they were ambushed by the Camarilla, which also released a plague. Everyone else died on the spot, but Willa was lucky to survive. Realizing it was their nemesis, the Camarilla had returned, she immediately turned her guns on them. For this, she did not hesitate to change her mission, manipulating the audience at a soccer stadium to send a warning to the military. Now, Willa hoped Scylla would join her in eradicating the Camarilla. Scylla immediately agreed, but soon realized that her instructor was monitoring her and quickly dispelled her spells. After a while, Willa and Scylla used lighters to disguise themselves and went to a memorial service where someone was stirring up hatred against witches, clearly well prepared. After several probes, Scylla found a breakthrough. A couple seemed to know in advance the time and place of the next meeting, clearly closely connected to the Camarilla. Scylla planned to approach this Camarilla couple. Sometime later, Scylla returned to the mall where she had previously launched an attack. Now, a large crowd gathered there, mourning their lost loved ones. The sight deeply moved Scylla, who was filled with regret. Meanwhile, the Camarilla man was giving a speech, and his wife quickly located Scylla. Unexpectedly after the man, it was the instructor who took the stage, clearly having been tracking Scylla. After the speeches, the two confronted each other, realizing they both wanted to eliminate the Camarilla. After some discussion, they considered collaborating. Scylla directly introduced the instructor to the Camarilla couple. To avoid revealing their identities, they used pseudonyms. That night, the four enjoyed a great time talking in a bar. Soon, someone came looking for the man who seemed to be the key to getting close to the Camarilla organization. The scene shifts. Rael and Abigail have been undergoing experiments at the hands of the doctor. Despite several tests, they still can't trigger their witch powers again. Out of options, General Sarah decides to send them to attend the War College while the doctor begins to study the corpse Abigail had previously discovered. At the War College, the witches are divided into different squads, each named after a different war goddess. The squad that the witch trio belong to is led by a bald woman. Moreover, Abigail's old friend is also in the same squad. While the bald woman is talking with Rael, the doctor makes a shocking discovery. The corpse suddenly speaks in Rael's voice. Upon dissection, it is found to be filled with mycelium. It then dawns on her that Rael had previously come into contact with the wall's mycelium and had left unharmed. This could be why the mycelium was able to traverse half the globe and occupy a corpse. Meanwhile, Abigail is talking to her squad mates about her friend, who turns out to be the dance partner stolen by Abigail's arch-enemy. Unexpectedly, the friend comes forward to clear up the misunderstanding, revealing that he had been secretly dating Abigail's arch-enemy. This old story fades away with the revelation. Soon after, the general arrives to motivate the team with an inspiring talk, urging them to study hard to combat the Camarilla. Before class, Tally notices that Penelope, the newcomer, is struggling to adapt and offers her comfort. This class is a language lesson where they learn the witches' exclusive language, their mother tongue. Adil, a native speaker, is invited by the teacher to assist. After class, Tally proposes to the general that she could help Penelope acclimate to Fort Salem, to which the general readily agrees. At the same time, spokespersons from other countries' witch councils have arrived at Fort Salem. To the general's surprise, Adil's sister also attends the meeting, announcing her plans to scout for a new settlement abroad. The Indian spokesperson steps forward, eager to welcome Adil's sister. With no way to prevent this, the general warns everyone to be vigilant against the Camarilla's plague weapons, which target witches specifically. In the midst of this, Tally experiences another nightmare. She discovers that the soldiers had been using a forbidden spell from the witch's cannon. However, the general does not stop them, merely advising them to use their powers responsibly as they are potent weapons. Coincidentally, soon after, Tally and her squad attend a class on forbidden spells. The teacher explains that while witches are not permitted to use spells outside the official canon, their enemies will stop at nothing to wield such spells. Therefore, the witches must learn to identify them. To give the students a first-hand experience of the dangers of forbidden spells, the teacher has them put on blindfolds and navigate a strange, cluttered room. Fortunately, with Tally's unique ability, she leads everyone to another room, this time filled with aggressive dolls. After a fierce struggle, Rael and Abigail are dragged into the shadows, but luckily, Tally quickly shuts down the spell, creating history by defeating the dollhouse on their first attempt. The teacher praises Tally's visual talents, though Rael and Abigail end up worse for wear and are taken to the doctor's lab. In a surprising turn, the doctor, upset at Rael for ruining her years of research, threatens to kill them as revenge. At this critical moment, Rael's powers burst forth, evolving into a protective cocoon. It turns out it's just a test by the doctor, who believes that true danger is needed to trigger such abilities. Everything goes according to her plan, confirming Rael's unique ability. However, as the victim of deceit, Rael is not pleased. To make matters worse, Abigail learns that she has no special powers and is disheartened. To top it all, the girl comes to tell Abigail that for the tribe's future, her brother Adil will eventually have to leave with her. The next day, Tally took Penelope on a tour of the Witch Museum and introduced her to the glorious history of witches. As they wandered through the exhibits, Tally stumbled upon a photo that seemed quite peculiar. On closer inspection, she realized that one of the soldiers in the photo had been magically concealed. Surprisingly, this mysterious soldier was the same one who used forbidden magic in her dreams. Scylla and the instructor teamed up to investigate the Camarilla, while General Sarah pushed for a nationwide inspection to find witches scattered among the populace. The general, accompanied by Petra, made a trip to the capital to propose the establishment of a testing center to screen all women of eligible age for military service. However, the president and vice president believed that mandatory testing could trigger massive public protests and were unwilling to take the risk. Just as the situation reached a deadlock, Petra noticed the general's maid suddenly chanting spells, realizing that the general was about to break the rules again. Indeed, under the general's forceful control, the president officially signed the order to construct the testing center. Meanwhile, the witches were attending classes based on their unique talents. Rael practiced a new ability called Witch Bomb. Tally attended a visual class, and Abigail tried to manipulate the weather. However, an important task awaited them today. They were summoned to meet the matriarch of Fort Salem, who was responsible for continuing the witch bloodline. She pointed out that it was time for the group to consider their lifelong commitments by choosing a suitable man to continue their lineage. As a result, all three were required to attend a ball at Abigail's family hall the following evening. Petra was particularly attentive to this, as her daughter Abigail was the last of her line, and she and the general were about to bring more descendants to Fort Salem. However, the matriarch, who valued pure bloodlines, disparagingly referred to witches like Rael with commoner fathers as crossbreeds. Hearing this, the general, who had old grievances with the matriarch, was displeased and argued vehemently with her, leading to an unpleasant parting. At the same time, Rael was chanting in front of the Mycelium. Unfortunately, despite several attempts, nothing happened. The doctor noted that the Mycelium's choice to establish a symbiotic relationship with Rael must have a reason. However, as it was late at night, the doctor decided to rest and try again the next day. Unwilling to give up, Rael, after the doctor left, loudly questioned why the Mycelium had granted her abilities but did not respond. To her surprise, the Mycelium indeed gave a hint, suggesting that Rael chant the song Scylla had taught her. Though confused, Rael complied. As she sang, the Mycelium extended its GPS tendrils, but the moment was short-lived as several tendrils firmly grasped Rael. Fortunately, the doctor heard Rael's cries for help and arrived in time to retract the tendrils. The next day, the matriarch sought out Abigail for a serious talk. According to family lineage, she hoped Abigail would marry her friend, who also came from nobility. However, Abigail staunchly refused. At this point, the matriarch stopped holding back and openly declared that she would not allow Adil, who wasn't even a soldier, to marry Abigail. She demanded that Abigail get engaged by the end of the year. Feeling pressured to marry, a frustrated Abigail went to her squad for support, but her teammates were facing their own struggles. Rael had become a subject of live experiments, while Tally was busy searching for the mysterious soldier shown in the photo, and also guiding Penelope in her singing studies. Nevertheless, Rael and Tally couldn't escape the matriarch's marriage pressures either. Facing the pressure from her elders, Rael outright revealed herself as a lesbian, which did not deter the matriarch, who still insisted that Rael should marry and have children. She even criticized Rael's mother for marrying a commoner. Unable to tolerate more, Rael retorted sharply, her usually shaky grasp of her mother tongue suddenly fluent. In contrast to the imposing matriarch, General Sarah appeared much more amiable. The doctor discovered that Rael's voice contained thousands of layers of sound and that her throat was covered in mycelium. The general then allowed Rael to sing to the mycelium. This time, Rael made significant progress, barely managing to control the mycelium to smash a huge hole in the wall. Realizing Rael's new abilities, the doctor pointed out that she could not only cause organic matter to decay, but also decompose inorganic matter, much to the general's satisfaction. Now considered a major asset, Rael was exempted from attending the matchmaking ball that evening to continue her training. The general even took her outdoors, where Rael effortlessly used a witchcraft bomb to destroy a target building. After her spell, magical mushrooms grew out of the ground, leaving everyone who witnessed it utterly astonished. Meanwhile, Tally and Abigail had to attend the matchmaking ball. Unlike the compliant Tally, Abigail longed to control her own destiny. She remembered an ancestor who had used a powerful and unprecedented ability to alter the course of a battle. Since then, this ability had been sealed, and no descendant had been able to surpass that ancestor. Now, Abigail believed that neither the pacifist Adil nor the continuation of a lineage of witch soldiers would end the war. She planned to emulate her ancestor and create a new ability to terminate the Camarilla. Seeing Abigail become obsessed, Adil stopped trying to persuade her. Without delay, Abigail decided to skip the ball that evening and practice her abilities. Tally had no choice but to go alone. There, she entered the general's memories and finally uncovered the whole truth. The mysterious soldier was named Sergeant Nicta, who had repeatedly used an ability to make enemies turn on each other while fighting alongside General Sarah. Disgusted by the general's actions of killing surrendered rebels, Sergeant Nicta had chosen to part ways with her. Tally was shocked by the revelations and the worsening situation outside. Indicative of Abigail attempting to develop a new ability, Adil rushed to find her. Unfortunately, he was too late. Abigail had successfully summoned 2 massive tornadoes, but was struggling to sustain such a powerful ability. Within seconds, she collapsed, coughing up blood. On the other side, Scylla and the instructor continued their undercover plan, gaining the full trust of a Camarilla couple. With the news of the vice president's daughter joining the army spreading nationwide, critics like the Camarilla couple naturally had much to say. During a conversation, the Camarilla wife casually mentioned that a classmate of his daughter had been tested and identified as a witch. While they were talking, a friend of the Camarilla husband's came looking for him. Knowing that the military had not yet established testing centers, the instructor suspected that the Camarilla was up to something and decided to follow the man's friend. They trailed him all night and finally discovered that the Camarilla had collaborated with school doctors to secretly test young girls. If they had witch blood, they couldn't endure the sounds played by the doctor. Even Scylla in disguise was forced to reveal her true identity. Given that the Camarilla had already begun their testing, the military quickly produced a recruitment video in preparation for a major inspection. The testing center was also bustling with preparations. Additionally, Petra hoped to initiate tests at schools first and collaborate with Scylla to track down the whereabouts of the Camarilla. In this matter, the instructor sided with Petra and openly expressed her dissatisfaction with the general's repeated violations of principles. Although the general was greatly annoyed, she still prioritized the bigger picture and allowed the instructor to continue tracking the contact and devised a plan to locate Camarilla's minor leader, the bishop. By this time, Abigail was gradually recovering, but Adil was still holding a grudge against her actions. Coincidentally, there was also an invitation from India for Adil and his sister to visit for an inspection. Adil then directly informed Abigail of his impending departure, putting their relationship on even thinner ice. Seizing the opportunity, Petra continued to press for marriage, urging her friend to quickly choose someone from among the nobility's children. Meanwhile, Tally asked Petra about Sergeant Nicta, but she only knew what was recorded in history books. The books mentioned only that the Liberian rebels had collectively chosen martyrdom and pointed out that General Sarah was not present, suggesting that the general had launched a historical narrative to whitewash her own role. Tally could only look elsewhere for evidence. The testing center is about to have its grand opening, but the Camarilla has already arranged for demonstrators to protest at the site, and they've even secretly planted bombs. The military is completely unaware of this, and they're planning to send the bald woman to lead a team to the opening ceremony to maintain order. Rael will serve directly as the general's bodyguard, while Tally will be protecting Penelope. Meanwhile, Scylla and the instructor, following the Camarilla contact, have also arrived at the scene. Scylla is nostalgically holding onto a photo of Rael, which irritates the instructor, who reminds her to focus on the mission. Soon after, the two blend into the crowd of demonstrators with the help of the Camarilla couple, who thoughtfully provide them with masks to prevent the military from recognizing them. When the witches take the stage, General Sarah signals Penelope to sing, showcasing the witches' unique abilities to the crowd. Although the rising water columns truly amaze the spectators, they continue their protest during the general's speech, even frightening some new recruits to tears. As emotions run high, the Camarilla's agents jump into action, throwing Molotov cocktails. Fortunately, the witches manage to dodge in time, preventing any casualties. The testing at the center proceeds orderly, but the Camarilla is also preparing to strike. The general soon learns of their presence at the site and decides to falsely claim that Spree are causing a disturbance to clear the area without causing panic. However, as soon as the announcement is made, the Camarilla acts, causing the witches' communication devices to malfunction. After a ringing in her ears, Abigail hears her deceased cousin calling her, a clear trap set by the Camarilla. Nevertheless, she rushes out, following the sound to the parking lot, where she realizes she's walked into an ambush. Meanwhile, Rael and the others discover the bombs planted by the Camarilla and start evacuating the crowd. However, the demonstrators surround the witches, delaying them long enough for the bombs to detonate. The blast hits everyone, but fortunately, the Camarilla did not intend to target the general public, resulting in mostly superficial injuries. When the squad members recover, they realize Abigail is missing and immediately go out to search for her. At that moment, Abigail is fiercely fighting the Camarilla, who came prepared. Overpowered and still recovering from a throat injury, Abigail is soon subdued by the Camarilla, who prepare to cut her vocal cords. Just in time, the bald woman leads a team to the rescue, easily handling the Camarilla. Meanwhile, Rael, who stayed at the scene to maintain order, catches a glimpse of Scylla, but in the blink of an eye, Scylla disappears, leaving only Rael's photo behind. After the attack, Petra is deeply worried, as it's clear the Camarilla is out to take Abigail's life. The general can only comfort her to let go of her hatred and seek the truth. But Abigail feels deeply frustrated. Not only did she fail to protect her cousin, but she also fell into a trap, severely denting her self-esteem and plunging her into intense self-doubt. What frustrates Abigail even more is that the general still claims the attack was launched by Spree. Unable to bear the continuous lies, Tally confronts the general, demanding an explanation about Sergeant Nicta. The military officially opened the testing center to seek out witches hiding among the civilians. However, the Camarilla attacked the opening ceremony, nearly costing Abigail her life. At this moment on the other side of the globe, the Indian commander is accompanying Adil and his sister on an inspection tour. She advises the girl to stay in her own country, but the girl has already realized that the commander is only interested in harnessing her abilities. Unbeknownst to them, the Camarilla has poisoned the commander's tea with a plague, leading to her sudden death. Adil, witnessing this, quickly grabs his sister and they flee. Their train soon spirals out of control. Meanwhile, back at the base, General Sarah stubbornly denies her presence at the incident site when confronted by Tally. Tally openly admits that she still shares a connection with the general and has seen her memories. As her murky past is exposed, the general resorts to using her authority to dismiss Tally from her office. Rael seeks out the instructor to inquire about Scylla's whereabouts. Due to the need for secrecy, the instructor remains tight-lipped, only admitting that Scylla has escaped from prison, but cannot share more details. Scylla, meanwhile, is busy maintaining contact with the Camarilla couple. Due to Willa's focus on combating the Camarilla, her subordinates are dissatisfied, believing they should concentrate on fighting the government forces instead. Unable to persuade each other, they decide to part ways. As the Witches' End of Summer Festival approaches, everyone in Fort Salem is busy with preparations, allowing the witches a brief respite from their troubles. However, the peace is short-lived as Abigail's friend arrives with news of Adil and his sister being attacked in India, their fate unknown. This succession of blows causes Abigail to behave uncharacteristically, even conceding defeat during a physical training session. But rather than losing spirit, Abigail is determined to strike back and eradicate the Camarilla, especially since the Indian military has publicly condemned them, leaving General Sarah unable to deny the Camarilla's resurgence. Worse still, due to the previous attack, the vice president has decided to postpone the testing activities at the center. Meanwhile, the civilian population is gearing up for Halloween, and the Camarilla naturally plans to hold a rally during the festival. After a long period of undercover work, Scylla and the instructor gain the Camarilla man's full trust, and he brings them to the rally. They blend in by wearing masks. The Camarilla's underboss, the bishop, finally makes an appearance and spearheads the wild party. Unexpectedly, the Camarilla man, aiming to prove his loyalty, brings along his daughter's classmate, who has been identified as a witch. The bishop plans to use her as a sacrifice for the party. With no other choice, the instructor intervenes. She plans to cut the power to the witch dampener to give Scylla an opportunity to act. However, her actions draw the attention of a Camarilla member she had previously been tracking. No longer hiding, she engages him in a fight. Due to this mishap, the young girl's life hangs in the balance. Desperate, Scylla reveals her witch identity to buy time, offering her life in exchange for the girl's safety. Surprised by this unexpected turn of events, the bishop agrees. Just in the nick of time, the instructor pulls the power switch, allowing Scylla to unleash her magic. She roars at the bishop, causing the crowd to scatter. Then, using a lighter, Scylla absorbs the bishop's appearance and escapes with the girl. To ensure no future threats, Scylla disguises herself as the Camarilla wife the next day and kills her husband. The curtain rose on the War College's end-of-summer festival. In keeping with tradition, the cadets were to summon an army of the Undead, which would stop at nothing to extinguish the flames guarded by the college. The cadets had to hold out until the stroke of midnight to complete their mission. As for the rewards, they could choose any deceased witch, temporarily bring her back to life, and engage in a conversation but not a hormone yoga session. Soon, the Undead army arrived on cue. In the dim visibility, everyone had to rely on their reflexes to block the arrows fired by the Undead. Amidst the chaos, Abigail's friend was struck by an arrow, and Rael rushed to his aid. However, the Undead's firepower was too intense, forcing Rael to deploy a witch bomb to get the squad through the ordeal safely. After obtaining the resurrection candle, each member of the witch group went their separate ways to summon the dead. Abigail directly resurrected her cousin to apologize for not having saved her, but her cousin bluntly said it was Abigail herself who couldn't let go. She reminded Abigail not to be easily deceived again and to focus on accomplishing her grand mission of revenge. Rael wanted to summon her mother, but unknown to her, since her mother wasn't actually dead, she waited in vain all night, mistakenly thinking her mother didn't want to see her, which left her heartbroken. Meanwhile, Tally didn't meet her own family, but instead resurrected the rebel leader. From her memories, Tally became more certain that it was General Sarah who had used Sergeant Nicta's abilities to make all the rebels turn on each other. The next day, the trio discussed their conversations from the previous night, each weighed down by heavy thoughts. After the festival, the War College entered a vacation period, giving the cadets a brief respite. During this time, Petra brought good news that Adil and his sister had survived the accident. The sister stayed in The Hague and sent Adil back to see Abigail. After this ordeal, their relationship was restored, and Abigail was more determined than ever to pursue her revenge plan. She planned to use the vacation to return to her ancestral home to investigate her cousin's body. Abigail thought she would only find her grandmother at home, but was surprised by the presence of many guests. Given the unique marriage customs of the High Atlantics, Abigail had 3 fathers, which was quite a shock to the newly arrived Adil. Back home, Abigail couldn't escape the fate of being pressured to marry. At that evening's dinner, the noble youths were eager to show off, but Adil, as the official boyfriend and a pacifist, felt no pressure to compete with the nobles. Interestingly, Abigail's grandmother took a relaxed view of her granddaughter's marital prospects, not pushing her like her mother did. Instead, she stood by her side, encouraging her to ignore others' opinions and do what she wanted, aspiring to become the greatest witch in the family's history. With her grandmother's words, Petra had little more to say. Abigail and Adil then went to the burial site of her cousin, where Adil managed to summon her cousin's body to obtain the blood needed for casting spells. Meanwhile, Tally accompanied Rael back to visit Rael's father. Rael specifically instructed Tally not to mention the witch bomb or the fact that she hadn't summoned her mother. Thus, the 3 could only talk about their usual academic and life routines. However, after Rael's father left, Tally still urged Rael to have a proper talk with her father about her mother. While they were arguing, Tally suddenly noticed that someone seemed to be spying on them. Realizing the danger, they quickly moved to get a better view and confront the situation. Fortunately, it was a false alarm. The people in the car were sent by the general on a mission to protect Rael. After clearing up the misunderstanding, Rael took Tally to meet an old friend of her mother, who mentioned seeing a bottle during the war that could make enemies turn on each other. 2 years after the massacre incident, these ability bottles had appeared on the other side of the Earth. Tally realized that Sergeant Nicta had taught the spree to use this ability, suggesting that Nicta might have been the founder of the spree. Everything was unfolding just as Tally had expected, and now Nicta was plotting a major newsworthy event. After returning to her home, Rael talked to her father about her attempt to summon her mother. Following her father's comforting words, Rael finally resolved her emotional turmoil. On the other hand, after Scylla rescued the little girl, she intended to take her home, but discovered that the girl's parents had been killed by the Camarilla. The instructor planned to take the girl back to the military, but Scylla believed the girl should decide whether to join the army when she grew up. To this end, Scylla used magic to stun the instructor and planned to take the girl to a deserter community for upbringing. Before this, Willa took the opportunity to connect with the girl and discovered from her memories that the Camarilla was capturing children and locking them in cages at a veterinary clinic. To rescue the trapped children, Scylla and Willa teamed up to break into the veterinary clinic, but they were a step too late as the Camarilla had already taken the children away. Worse still, they discovered that the Camarilla had marked Rael as their prime target. General Sarah was very upset upon hearing that the girl had been taken, and as the instructor had been exposed in front of the Camarilla, she allowed Petra's intelligence department to take over and track down the Camarilla's bishop. Meanwhile, after studying the plague samples from an attack in India, the doctor discovers that the plague remains dormant until it nears a witch, at which point it can kill a witch within minutes, and can also replicate itself, continuously seeking other witches. This means the plague's spread has no boundaries. After hearing this, General Sarah ordered the doctor to quickly find a solution. Unbeknownst to her, Sergeant Nicta was using magic to monitor every move of the general, and even used a forbidden spell to assassinate her. The sudden attack would have killed the general had it not been for a maid sharing the damage. At the same time, the Camarilla came after Rael, and several soldiers tasked with her protection were killed on the spot. Before Rael could use her witch bomb, she was hit by a sedative dart. Tally, who rushed out to rescue Rael, was also struck by a sedative dart and could only watch helplessly as Rael was taken away by the Camarilla. The next day, the military learned that Rael had been kidnapped and immediately dispatched the military police to rescue her. Upon hearing the news, the general was nearly apoplectic with rage. Despite being ill, she wanted to join the rescue herself, but given her weakened state and the potential threat of another attack from Sergeant Nicta, the instructor urged her to stay within the safety perimeter. Unfortunately, this coincided with the vice president's visit to discuss matters regarding the test center, forcing the general to delegate her responsibilities to Petra instead. Meanwhile, Scylla called the Rael family to confirm the kidnapping. In a bid to locate Rael, Scylla once again sought out the Camarilla bishop, using magic to control his mind and force him to lead her and Willa to the Camarilla's hideout. At the same time, Tally informed Willa's old friend about Rael's abduction and the Camarilla's return. He assured her that he and his friends would take care of Rael's father, encouraging Tally to leave without worry. Upon waking, Rael found herself in a lab, facing the Camarilla leader, Dr. Alban. After capturing Rael, Dr. Alban intended to use her as a live experimental subject, planning to torture her to death. His minions began by cutting Rael's throat. As she gasped her last breaths, Rael expelled numerous particles from her mouth, while her consciousness transported to a hallucinatory realm filled with fungal networks. Lost and confused, Rael was suddenly awakened by a voice that informed her she was in the death dream, healing her wounds automatically. The deranged Dr. Alban, seeing this, brought several young girls to Rael and had a boulder dropped on her to test if she could control her powers. Unable to bear harming the innocent, Rael was crushed to death, only to revive moments later with no harm coming to the children. Frustrated, Dr. Alban ordered his minions to take the girls away and decided to resort to his ultimate weapon to kill Rael. Elsewhere, after collecting Abigail's cousin's blood, Adil created a blood compass. Since the Camarilla had stolen the cousin's vocal cords, the compass could point not only to her remains, but also to the location of the vocal cords. Thus, Abigail and Adil set out to find the Camarilla's den. Halfway there, they stopped at a restaurant for a break, where they saw Petra and the vice president speaking on TV. Due to the Camarilla's long-term propaganda, the misinformed public viewed witches as dangerous beasts and spoke rudely about Petra. Abigail grew increasingly angry and ended up arguing with the public. To protect Abigail, Adil severely injured a troublemaker with a punch. Fearing a public backlash, Abigail quickly pulled Adil away. Calming down, Adil reflected on his breach of conduct, while Abigail struggled to convince him to continue fighting alongside her. As they neared the Camarilla's lair, to avoid alerting them, Adil used an invisibility spell and led Abigail inside stealthily. At the same time, Scylla and Willa had also arrived, but faced with extensive surveillance, they were stumped and forced to halt to locate Rael's room. Unfortunately, the Camarilla outside detected the intrusion and triggered an alarm. Willa had to handle the foot soldiers. In contrast, Adil and Abigail, with Adil's invisibility and phasing through walls, easily found the Camarilla holding the cousins' vocal cords. These Camarillas were also responsible for guarding the imprisoned children. Abigail, at full power, literally shouted the Camarillas to death and retrieved the vocal cords, avenging her cousin. Adil, in his protective role, once again broke his vow by killing a Camarilla who attempted to ambush Abigail. Afterward, the two split up to carry out their tasks. Adil took responsibility for rescuing the children, while Abigail went to find Rael based on the information provided by the little girl. At the same time, Scylla and Willa pinpointed Rael's location. However, at that moment, the doctor had already inflicted Rael with the witch's plague, having received an alert from his subordinates. With no time to spare for observation, he hastily left the scene. This ultimate move proved to be extraordinary, as Rael could no longer revive herself using her own power. Fortunately, Scylla and Willa arrived just in time. Knowing that once afflicted with the plague there was no chance of survival, Willa decided to enter the lab alone. Using her family's innate ability to absorb diseases, she transferred the plague to herself. By the time Abigail arrived, Willa had completed the spell, sacrificing her life to save her daughters. In an instant, Willa's consciousness entered the realm of deathly dreams. In her final moments, Willa told her daughter that she had faked her death to create a better world for her. However, she regretted losing precious time with her daughter. Now all she could do was apologize and express her love. The tender moment soon ended, and back in reality, Rael realized that it was her mother who had saved her. Unfortunately, she didn't have a chance to look at her mother more before Scylla and Abigail whisked her away. The witch trio, along with Adil, escaped just as the plague was about to strike, successfully reaching safety. Before leaving, Adil didn't forget to cast a spell to destroy the Camarilla's lair. Both Adil and Abigail were well aware that the Camarilla would not let them go easily. Soon, the news of Rael's rescue reached Fort Salem, where Tally was with the general. Not wanting Sergeant Nicta to launch another attack, General Sarah, who was supposed to be safe within a protective circle, was shockingly suspended mid-air. Tally quickly realized something was amiss and shouted at a maid, ending Sergeant Nicta's spell. Using her fiery eyes, Tally discovered a connection between the maid and Sergeant Nicta, revealing the maid as Sergeant Nicta's spy. Long after, Rael finally woke up. Opening her eyes, she found Scylla sitting beside her. After everything they had been through, the two finally had a chance to talk properly. Following their conversation, Rael and Scylla reconciled and restored their relationship. Meanwhile, after being interrogated, the spy maid revealed Sergeant Nicta's location. General Sarah decided to send a commando team to take her life. With her fiery eyes, Tally was chosen by the general for the mission. Just before departure, Petra secretly approached Tally, asking her to spare Sergeant Nicta's life and capture her alive to reveal the truth to the world. This aligned with Tally's own intentions, and she agreed immediately. The next day, the witches regrouped. Adil, due to his special status, would not participate in this operation and would return to Fort Salem by helicopter. Scylla volunteered to help due to her familiarity with the Spree's abilities, and with Rael vouching for her, she was added to the commando team. The team soon arrived near Sergeant Nicta's cabin in the woods. They had only taken a few steps when they encountered a swarm of bats, which seemed to be just passing through. However, Rael suddenly saw a sofa from her home appear before her. As she puzzled over this, she heard her father's cries. The next second, Rael found herself back home, now in different clothes, with her parents preparing dinner. Suddenly, the phone rang, and the voice on the other end kept telling Rael that she was in an illusion. Then, Rael's mother suddenly turned violent, killing Rael's father and even attempting to attack Rael. When Willa slashed at her daughter's neck, Rael returned to reality, realizing it had all been Nicta's illusion. Having studied this ability before, Scylla was immune to its effects. Rael quickly realized that the others must also be in danger and hurriedly started searching with Scylla. Just as Rael had predicted, Tally found herself trapped in an illusion. Instead of her family, she was confronted by General Sarah, who demanded that Tally revert to being her maid. Naturally, Tally refused, prompting the general to order other maids to forcefully cast spells on her. Fortunately, Rael and Scylla arrived just in time to pull Tally back to reality. The trio had barely caught their breath when several tornadoes appeared nearby, undoubtedly the work of Abigail. Lost in the illusion, Abigail was being cheered on by her family, causing her to create unprecedentedly massive tornadoes. As she gradually lost control, the trio rushed to awaken her. However, Abigail was so focused and frustrated by her failed spellcasting in the illusion that she couldn't snap back to reality. At the last moment, Rael and Tally, using all their might, finally managed to wake her. It was clear that the illusions Nicta had set for them were based on their deepest fears. After experiencing Nicta's intimidation, the group hurried to regroup with the others. Unfortunately, the rest of the commando team had already met their demise. Nicta's hideout was just ahead. Abigail led the charge into the cabin, but Nicta was nowhere to be found, leaving only expendable items used for her spells. At this moment, the group started a heated argument, revealing each other's hurtful past and even coming to blows. Only Tally remained calm and did not participate in the fight. She quickly used her fiery eyes to realize that Sergeant Nicta was casting spells using bats. Once her trick was exposed, Nicta no longer hid and confronted Tally. Facing this evil witch, skilled in numerous forbidden arts, Tally was no match and tried to negotiate instead. However, she quickly discovered that Nicta had overused her powers, was depleted and no longer capable of killing her. Realizing she was exposed again, an enraged Nicta launched a desperate final attack. Suddenly, the fighting inside the cabin stopped as Scylla realized Nicta had ceased her spells. As they wondered what was happening, they heard Tally's shouts outside. They rushed out to find that Tally had knocked Nicta unconscious. It seemed that everything had ended with more fright than harm. That evening, the group prepared to escort Sergeant Nicta back to Fort Salem. Scylla couldn't join them, so Rael suggested she stay at her father's house temporarily. On the way back, Abigail apologized to Rael for the cabin incident. Rael, understanding it was Nicta's spell at play, didn't hold it against her, as their sisterly bond had been tested over time. While Tally listened to their conversation indifferently, Nicta was unusually agitated. Soon the group presented Nicta to the general, who was taken aback by her being brought back alive. Nevertheless, she quickly adjusted her demeanor and modified her speech to announce Nicta's trial. However, Tally watched coldly from the sidelines and suddenly attempted to attack the general. But Abigail reacted quickly, stopping Tally while the others restrained her. It turned out that this Tally was Nicta in disguise, having defeated Tally and taken her chance during their earlier encounter in the woods. Despite Sergeant Nicta's disguise, she was ultimately captured and reduced to a prisoner. The destruction of Camarilla's stronghold and the successful capture of Sergeant Nicta, the creator of the spree, was undoubtedly a major victory for the government forces. The following day, the president and vice president both made visits to Fort Salem to witness Nicta's trial. General Sarah planned to use connections to extract the locations of the spree's various branches from Nicta's memories, aiming to completely eradicate them. However, Nicta incinerated the general's subordinates on the spot and specifically requested that Tally come to interrogate her. Given Nicta's dangerous nature, Petra requested Tally's presence. Unafraid, Tally entered the cell alone. Through their conversation, Tally realized that Nicta wanted her to bring up the massacre event and reveal the true story to the public. So in front of the president, Tally exposed General Sarah's dark past. This move caught the general off guard, and the president confronted her. He demanded that she step down after Nicta's execution, appointing Petra as the new witch in charge. At this point, General Sarah had no power to turn the tides and was forced to resign. However, before the transfer of power, she showed her final dignity as the leader, reminding Petra of the immense pressures that come with sitting at the pinnacle of power. Petra, however, was only joyful about her ascent and didn't truly heed her words. Meanwhile, Adil's sister returned to Fort Salem from The Hague. Upon seeing her brother, she immediately sensed that he had killed someone and accused him of breaking his vows. Despite Adil's explanations, his sister refused to forgive him. Scylla reported to Rael that she was living a peaceful life with her father, and the little girl she rescued had been accepted by the deserter community. Inspired by Nicta's manipulation of bats, Scylla started practicing using crows, and she has already seen significant progress. With a slight manipulation, she can make passers-by drop everything and start dancing in TikTok style. Soon, the news of General Sarah's resignation spread throughout Fort Salem, but the real reason for her stepping down was not made public. Tally's hoped-for truth remained unrevealed, though Nicta seemed unfazed by this. In her view, her death would simply be a trade-off for Sarah's resignation and would prompt the spree to seek revenge. The situation was unfolding far beyond what Tally had anticipated, and she realized she must find a way to stop it from happening. Abigail, as a beneficiary, quickly approached her mother, suggesting they shift their focus entirely to fighting the Camarilla. Now in power, the mother decided to heed Abigail's advice. In contrast, Rael was much worse off, being relieved of active duty and about to become merely a poster figure for external propaganda. Not wanting to remain a bystander, she sought to discuss this with the doctor, but since the doctor was still teaching, Rael had to wait in the Mycelium room. Unexpectedly, Willa's figure emerged from the Mycelium, drawing Rael into an illusion. At this moment, the origin of the Mycelium was finally revealed. It turns out, when the Camarilla attacked General Sarah's first witch group during her campaign, all were burned alive. The general, who witnessed this horrific scene, could not contain her grief and sang a song of sorrow. As she sang, the deceased witches sank into the ground, becoming mycelium with magical energy. To commemorate her fallen colleagues, General Sarah established Fort Salem on this land. From then on, the souls of the deceased witches became part of the Mycelium, which is why Willa can now speak to Rael. Now that the Mycelium has chosen to pass its power to Rael, she is destined to be recorded in history and change the course of the entire war. Meanwhile, preparations for Petra's succession ceremony were in full swing. After taking charge, her first order of business was to promote the instructor to the head of the intelligence department, the position she herself had once held, as a thank you for her support. The instructor's old flame now served as the vice president's bodyguard, suggesting a bright future for everyone involved. After some time, Nicta's trial officially began, attended by the witch soldiers and the president. Given Nicta's heinous crimes, Sarah announced her execution. However, witches don't burn their own. Sarah planned to whip Nicta's heart, brain, and soul to end her life. Just before the execution, Tally requested a substitution ritual to trade her life for Nicta's, essentially challenging Sarah to a duel. Faced with this unprecedented request, Sarah initially ignored it, but Tally forced her hand by striking first, compelling Sarah to retaliate. Clearly, Tally was pushing her to the brink, forcing her to reveal her darkest secrets. Outmatched, Tally was on the verge of being killed by Sarah when Rael stepped in, also demanding a duel, followed by Abigail and others joining in. Despite this, Sarah was reluctant to confess her dark past until Tally revealed all the truths publicly. Sarah even suggested sparing Nicta's life to avoid further infighting. With no other choice, Sarah publicly admitted her mistakes and cautioned the younger generation not to repeat her errors. After her final speech, she removed her epaulets and medals, handing them over to Petra, and walked away dejectedly, marking the end of an era. After the dust settled, the vice president came to visit his daughter Penelope, who was preparing for a media interview. He looked oddly emotional, as if saying a final goodbye to his daughter before heading back to Washington. He even gave his bodyguard time off, allowing her a chance to rekindle things with the instructor. However, just as they were about to rekindle their romance, alarms suddenly rang out. Unbeknownst to them, the Camarilla had infiltrated Fort Salem and unleashed a witch's plague, causing chaos as countless people lost control over their vocal cords and began casting spells wildly. It was then that the witch group discovered that the Camarilla's leader, Dr. Alban, was actually inside Fort Salem. But due to the rampant plague, they couldn't confront him directly. Meanwhile, in the underground command center, the discussions were heated. The recently deposed Sarah didn't sit idle. She volunteered to help and joined the instructor to rally the officers. Petra also ordered her subordinates to bring Nicta to address the plague. But as the Camarilla had already broken in, Petra had no choice but to join forces with Nicta to fight back. Soon, Dr. Alban himself arrived to flex his bullshit. He sarcastically thanked Sergeant Nicta for giving him an opportunity and tarnished the public's favorable impression of witches. He also declared his determination to stop Abigail and Adil's alliance at any cost. After dropping his harsh words, Dr. Alban made a quick exit, instructing his minions to eliminate Petra and Nicta. At this point, Petra simply unlocked Nicta's shackles, allowing her to cast spells freely. Together, they effortlessly defeated the Camarilla. After this battle, Nicta finally had a change of heart and decided to join the government forces against the Camarilla. In stark contrast, the situation for Sarah and the instructor was far from optimistic. They encountered a large group of Camarilla, and despite their formidable strength allowing them to hold their own, Sarah's maid brigade was tragically wiped out. Even though the instructor managed to rescue her in the nick of time, without her maids to sustain her life, Sarah aged rapidly and succumbed to death almost instantly. At that moment, the witch group stumbled upon another batch of Camarilla. Tally suddenly realized she could see the frequency emitted by the Camarilla and decided to counter each move directly. She chanted a targeted song that successfully destroyed the disruptors carried by the Camarilla. Once their disruptors were gone, the Camarilla stood no chance against the witches. Seeing this tactic work, the bald woman split everyone up. She went to spread Tally's method while the main group headed to the combat building to try and stop the plague's spread. Abigail had Adil go first to protect his sister. Luckily, Adil arrived just in time to fight the two Camarilla who had found her. But in terms of physical combat, Adil was slightly outmatched. Just as it looked like her brother was about to be killed, the sister broke her silence and with a mere roar, melted the Camarilla into fragments before her eyes. Simultaneously, Tally discovered that all the plagues in Fort Salem seemed to trace back to a single source. She sensed that this source was getting closer. However, none of them had expected that Penelope was the source of the plague. Poor Penelope, unaware of her role as the plague host, didn't notice what was happening to her. Rael tried to use a witch bomb to cleanse the plague from her body, but instead of curing her, it only caused Penelope immense pain. She quickly begged Tally to end her suffering. Knowing that Rael's powers alone were not enough, Abigail asked Rael to cast a spell, and then she followed up with a tornado. With Abigail and Rael's powers combined, Penelope was finally torn apart. The entire ordeal was captured on camera by reporters. After a night of fierce fighting, Fort Salem was in ruins, but fortunately, everyone was safe. However, Sarah was on her deathbed, her mental strength too strong for her to die immediately. In her final moments, she asked Rael and the others to see her off. After a moving farewell, the four of them committed Sarah's body to the Mycelium. The great witch leader had finally returned to her departed comrades. Those who survived faced even more challenges as the camera had recorded the entire process of Rael's team killing Penelope. Seizing the opportunity, the vice president accused them of murder and demanded they be legally punished. With undeniable evidence, the witch team had no choice but to surrender. Interestingly, they ended up being jailed with Nicta. Although Nicta had escaped the witch's punishment, the government was certainly not going to let her off the hook. Meanwhile, Petra had already rushed to Washington to plead with the president. However, the president, armed with a complete video of the events, was unwilling to show leniency. She knew her daughter's squad's chances of survival would be significantly reduced once they left Fort Salem, so she ordered the instructor to act immediately. The instructor quickly got in touch with Scylla, and Adil's sister realized from last night's incident that protecting her loved ones was not a crime, and decided to fight alongside her brother. The instructor also reached out to them for help. A short while later, the vehicle transporting the witch group and Nicta had left Fort Salem. Adil and his sister had already ambushed the route, casting a spell that caused the road to collapse. A swarm of crows then flew towards the vehicle, clearly Scylla's handiwork. Under her spell, the police released the four individuals. Just as the group reunited, the weather suddenly changed, and a helicopter appeared nearby. It was Petra and the instructor who arrived. They advised the group to live undercover for a while and watch how things unfolded. As for the jailbreak, they naturally decided to stick to tradition by pinning everything on the spree. Upon hearing this, Nicta used a lighter to disguise the car, and the group parted ways, waiting for the right moment to make a comeback. The scene shifts to the vice president on a plane, repeatedly watching the last footage left by his daughter. The staff member next to Penelope at that time was actually Dr. Albin. It's then revealed that the vice president had been in cahoots with the Camarilla all along, aiming to eradicate the witches. He even allowed Dr. Albin to infect his own daughter with the witch plague, indirectly causing Penelope's death. However, neither anticipated that in Fort Salem's underground world, the Mycelium was using its power to revive Sarah, setting the stage for a fateful battle to unfold. With that, Season 2 of this drama concludes.